Hey, what's up? It's Phoenix, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm very excited because today, as part of my ongoing Philosopher series, I am going to talk about Epictetus and his book, The Enchiridion. And I'm very excited to talk about this book today as part of my Philosopher series, so without further ado, let's dive right in. Now, you might be wondering, so far I've talked about the pre-Socratics, Plato, and Aristotle, and I've talked about both of them, all of them, and you might be wondering where Epictetus fits in the tradition of philosophy, with this lineage specifically. And in Western philosophy, Epictetus is described as a Stoic philosopher, and he is in the tradition of Western philosophy, and so he definitely engages with the philosophers previously, and he definitely engages with philosophy in general. And in contrasting Epictetus with somebody like Plato or Aristotle, I would say that the Stoic philosopher Epictetus is much more direct and straightforward. I would say that his philosophy often very much focuses on specific principles, and I would describe his writing as being less ornamental or even less abstract, because essentially what he's doing in his book, The Enchiridion, is focusing on specific points and specific principles to go over, and so that has very specific implications for the type of book that he writes. The Enchiridion itself is structured into different parts, but the parts are aphoristic in nature, and so they don't go into as much depth, at least in terms of abstract notions of philosophy such as Plato or Aristotle. And so that is an interesting comparison. Now, early philosophy, as you know, with the pre-Socratics, focused on cosmology, and they focused on trying to understand the world around them through abstract concepts. And then by the time you get to Plato, you see this shift where it seems that what is most important is ethics and our values and how we talk about these various things. So I would say that early philosophy in general, starting from Plato, focuses a lot on ethics, and so it seems to me that Epictetus is continuing that tradition. And so that has very specific implications for for how we engage with philosophy and how Epictetus is engaging with philosophy. But even though Epictetus is a continuation of the ethical philosophy of someone like Plato, there is still a way in which Epictetus is kind of working within a different style and context. And so this is really interesting to think about because it makes his philosophy almost a different system and style. And even though this is just my theory, and this is just me positing my idea about philosophy and my beliefs about philosophy, I would say that philosophy has always been the endeavor to explore the world, and so sometimes that includes going in different directions and possessing a different style than your predecessors. And I definitely sense this with Epictetus. Epictetus is helping to invent Stoicism, so he's very much thinking about a specific way of going about the world and living. And so this has very intense implications for what philosophy can do and what philosophy can be. And so philosophy is not just one linear system and one linear tradition, but it is a multitude of traditions, and those traditions often go into different directions while also merging with other directions in philosophy. And so there's always what could be called a give and take. There's always much more that they are building and expanding upon. Now, what is actual Stoicism? I hope to talk more about Stoicism by talking about other Stoic philosophers such as Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, but I would say that in the book The Enchiridion, Epictetus talks a lot about, as I've said, principles and ethics, and he does this by talking about the way in which we must see our minds as being independent from the external and physical world, in even the social world, how it is our minds that influence us, and actually this idea of the mind being so independent from the external realm is something that has inspired my own philosophy as well, in terms of thinking about what that means. And so there is a Buddhist notion in Epictetus and his philosophy of aversion and attachment, which comes a little bit from Buddhism. I don't know the lineage specifically with these ideas, but Epictetus talks about this, and it seems that he thinks that it is very easy for us to be too attached to exterior things, and this is why we have to focus on introspection and retrospection and contemplation, because our minds are independent, for the most part, from everything else in the world. So there might be things that we experience, such as an aversion that we don't like, but it really is about our attitude. It's about how we look at these things in the external world and how we go about that in our daily lives and how we see that as affecting us. I personally find these notions to be pretty empowering in many ways, because I do like the idea that our minds are very aware of what is going on while also being detached from that as well. And so this is kind of where the idea of Stoicism comes from. The idea of being stoic in the face of adversity or difficulty or challenges, and being able to focus in on those kinds of things internally, and being able to not let those things shake your internal peace and your internal will, and being able to be very well adapted to the external world that we experience all of the time. And so I find these ideas to be very powerful. Another idea that I've liked when I was reading the Enchiridion was this emphasis on allowing our opinions to be our own opinions and allowing other people's opinions to be their opinions. So there's a way in which Epictetus thinks that the way that we look at other people has to do with our own internal gauge, our own internal perspective. But that should very much be detached from other people's opinions, because those opinions, to use the kind of terminology that Epictetus uses, is exterior. It is external. It doesn't influence us in the same way. We might think that their opinions influence us or their actions, but really, again, it's just a matter of how we gauge the world and how we look at it, and really it's all about attitude. And I find these ideas to be very powerful. Now, these are some of the ideas in Stoicism, and I hope to talk about them much more in depth with other philosophers. But Stoicism has had a kind of conflicted relationship with myself, or I should say I have had a conflicted relationship, because there are aspects to Stoicism I like. I think that we should definitely be grounded in the world. We should definitely be grounded in our own understanding of things and our own kind of introspection, and not letting things get to us in the external world. But I do think that the external world influences us in more ways than Epictetus is willing to acknowledge. As an example, and this is a constant principle in Stoicism, there is the idea that if someone close to you dies, you should have been able to previously done the exercises that you need to be able to imagine that this person will die one day or could die, and that you're not always going to have them. And while I understand that this is a way of being less attached to things in the world, I don't like this idea for the simple reason that I do think it's okay to be really engaged with the world, almost so engaged that you admit, yeah, I would be very sad if this person close to me died. I would be very sad if this person was no longer here. And I think Stoicism goes a little bit too far by assuming that we would just be indifferent or apathetic to these kinds of things happening, but that is not necessarily the most effective way of going about things, in my opinion, because I do think while we should have a little bit of Stoic fortitude and a little bit of Stoic strength, we also should allow ourselves to be okay with the ambiguities of life, the things that we don't like, and I don't think the goal is always to turn off our passions, so to speak, to just turn off our internal life and the irrationality and the unpredictability. I think that in that way Stoicism is too strict. And so I think that can be very limiting. I also think that Stoicism itself doesn't capture the passions. It doesn't capture the different temperaments and personalities and ideas and realities that people have and face in this world. And I think that Stoicism is limited in that way, in preventing us from seeing the world as being about irrationality sometimes, as being chaotic and illogical. I think that's very important. I myself try to strive for rationality and reason, so in that way Stoicism appeals to me, but I don't want to take that idea too far. I do want to be able to accept the irrationality in the world, the illogical components, the things that don't make sense, the things that aren't Stoic, the things that are hard, the things that we may struggle to understand, and I think that that's very important to acknowledge. So I encourage you to read Epictetus and his book. I encourage you to check it out. I find it to be very interesting, and it's certainly a different perspective. And I think that Stoicism is valuable in many ways, but we must also keep it in check with our own viewpoints and being okay with the things that don't always make sense in the world, that we don't always have to be so apathetic and indifferent to things. I'm Phoenix, and I really enjoyed talking about Epictetus today, and I hope that you will check out my other videos. And yeah, thank you for stopping by. There is much more to come on my channel, so I will see you around. Thank you for watching.